So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regenerative. Hello, soil lovers, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Soil. You're hanging out with Regenerative. I'm so excited to get our hands dirty today with today's guest. Mark, welcome to the show from Save Our Soils Australia.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
Excellent. Well, share with our soil lovers a little bit about you and your biodynamic journey and your Save Our Soils Australia brand.
Well, in 1996, I heard Billy Connolly, a comedian who I quite like comedy, say more time should be spent sharing what the good things that humans do. And it really hit me, and I started to think about all our biodynamic farmers in their fields, too busy to jump on YouTube and too busy to jump on social media. And this was even before those times. And I thought I wanted to start a company that not only showed other people's stories, but my own. And I basically spread the good word or the regenerative nature of biodynamic agriculture throughout Australia. And that was the emphasis behind Save Our Soil. So I do that in two ways. One, obviously good food has good flavour. So I grow seasonal vegetables that used to go to the farmer's market and now we're online. So the consumers can see the difference between, what they've been eating and perhaps the difference with biodynamic ag. And the second way to influence people, I thought, was just to make information products. So obviously social media is one place. I do small YouTubes. I've done talks in the past, and recently I've just done an audiobook as well as a website as well. So what I'm trying to do is there's a lot of farmers now who are experiencing increased input costs, maybe some problems with their conventional agriculture. And for those that are looking, I just want to provide information in a nice kind of way, in a happy kind of way, so that people can see the stories and then get involved. And if they want more information, then I've got some available for them. So I sort of like to do it in that way.
Love that. And I think information and transferring that wisdom is a really beautiful gift. And that's what I do with the podcast. I want to have awesome conversations with people like yourself and then leave it online to keep giving and giving. You never know when the right person's going to hear the audio or watch that YouTube video. And sometimes even I forget what's out there in the ether. And then someone puts a comment. You're like, oh yeah, I did make that video 3 years ago. Yeah. So it's nice that, it keeps on giving that gift of knowledge and information. You started SOS or Save Our Soils Australia with a while ago. What kind of timeframes are we talking here?
It was back in 1996 I started. Just to give you a bit of background on my past, my father started biodynamics back in 1965 under the mentorship of Alex Podolinsky. And Alex used to do in his younger years many talks and many lectures and help people out a lot with, looking at some forms of regenerative ag and biodynamics in particular. So when he passed away in recent times, I really wanted to ramp it up then, because a lot of our guys, as I mentioned before, just don't have time to do that sort of work because they're out in the fields producing food, and that's hard enough, let alone get on a mic or get on a lecture theatre or something like that. So It was 1996 that I really started to think about it, but in recent years I've ramped it up a bit more. So, but just to give you a bit more background, is that a good place to go right now?
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm really interested in the difference between you growing up around biodynamics and people just discovering it. So I'm curious about your childhood and that.
Sure. So I don't know how to farm any other way. So, which Alex liked. He said, "You've got a pure BD mind." So, but in 1960, my father bought his first farm. He was in his early 20s, and it was a conventional farm. He'd been brought up on a conventional farm. He used to grow fruit, and they had cows and pigs and things like that. And that's what, in his childhood was when fertilizers first came about. So he learned all that. And then when he took over his own business in the early 60s, he took over an old sheep farm, which had been heavily grazed. And basically the root systems got shorter and shorter. So he applied the normal superphosphate. And that's about the only thing that was around in those days. And his soil just got harder and harder. And it got to a point where he couldn't get the irrigation water to go into the soil. It was just running off the other end, and it would go all horrible and stinky after a couple of days. And then within another 2 days, it was dry. So he started looking into ways, alternatives in which he could solve this problem, basically. So he went to an agronomist. He was like an organic agronomist, and he sort of gave the advice that he should put on some organic minerals. And he did that for about 18 months, and he couldn't really see any difference. And Dad didn't know anything about soil biology at all at that stage. But he heard about this guy called Alex Podolinsky, who was doing some lectures in our area. And he went to a few lectures, tried to work out what this new thing was. And anyway, in 1963, in December, when I was about 2 years old, he put out his first Preparation 500, which we'll probably talk about later. Anyway, he put Preparation 500 on half the farm because he was testing it out. He didn't know what this thing was. And he left the other half conventional. And the first signs he had of something actually working was he, after a few days or weeks, he put the cows out onto the biodynamic pasture, and he was surprised how short they had it right down to the ground. And once they'd eaten all that, he put them back over the longer grass on the conventional side. Anyway, they walked on the conventional grass, and they pretty much walked straight out of the paddock and started pushing on the gate that they'd just come out of where the short BD grass was.
Wow.
And Dad said, oh, my God, they prefer the BD grass. And then he didn't know why, but he thought there's something in this, and that's what made him continue.
Wow. That's so, it's so often that I hear stories of people need to see that transparency, that like line in the paddock, whether it's greener or more density, or the cattle ate that grass or wanted that grass, seeing is believing. With all these years of people talking about biodynamic and nurturing the soil, and now the advancement of the biology in the soil and so forth, why do you think people are still kind of resisting this and kind of still needing to see these results? Do you see any reason why people are not just jumping in knee deep into this kind of way of farming?
Well, I think sometimes, look, some BD practitioners are into, like Rudolf Steiner, who conceptualized the whole thing in 1924. He was a scientist, but he's also into architecture. He was into education, the Waldorf education. He was into spirituality. And some people who followed Rudolf Steiner went into the spirituality side of things, and then they carried it on into their farming as well. Whereas our Australian Demeter biodynamic farmers, who I'm involved with, they just like the farming method. So if it had the connotation of spirituality with it, a normal conventional farmer will run the other way. The other main reason I think is a problem, or could be a problem, was that we make our compost preparations or our 500 in cow horns, which seems a really odd thing to do. And it's not until recent times where we have, microbiologists with these genome tests are now starting to understand that there's a really good microbiology that comes in the depths of winter in the biodynamic pit, and also that they're reacting with the keratin in the horn. And they're starting to work out, hey, this is a really beneficial thing to do. But it wasn't, back in Dad's times, it was really just on faith. So I think actually the cow horn has actually sent people the other way because it was a little bit weird.
And isn't there a moon position involved as well?
Yeah, and there has been, and there's zodiac signs and things like that. And even that is starting to come into science a little bit more. Like I saw the gardening show, it was like Burke's Backyard or something like that. Don't quote me. I'm just, it was a normal type of gardening show. Anyway, the presenter thought, I'm going to disprove this.
Wow.
And he followed it, and he did a test, I think one day before new moon, and then on new moon, and then 2 days after. And anyway, he proved that it was correct, and he had to swallow his pride. So, and we've got to remember that the moon, affects women's cycles. It affects tides. It has a lot of effect on the earth. So why shouldn't it affect, some ways that the biology might work in the soil,
Yeah, absolutely. And even like I hear crime rate and so forth goes up on a full moon, and police and all that tend to, and ambulance and all that tend to schedule for that. And I find it weird because I grew up in an Italian culture, and it was just normal to grow by the moon. You wouldn't make sauce on a certain day. You wouldn't do salami on a certain day. Like there was all rhythms of the earth that you would follow. So again, I guess I grew up in that culture where I didn't think it was weird to grow something based on the moon. And when you think it affects the gravitational pull of the planet, you kind of think that makes sense. If the seed needs help pulling out of the ground or the water table needs to be higher, there's lots of things that can be playing. But yeah, I see it as a very normal thing as well. But I can completely understand where like some traditional farmers are just like, oh, I don't know, you've got to put cow horns under the ground all winter based on a moon cycle. Yeah, I'll just get that drum off the shelf and sit on a tractor for a couple of days, you know?
Yeah, and different biodynamic groups have different emphasis on the lunar cycle as well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the name lunatic comes from luna, which is moon. So it is, obviously the moon does have control over people a little bit. But like Alex always used to say, though, you know, if it means getting your preparations out in moist, wet soil, warm soil conditions, or being on the lunar cycle, then, or the zodiac cycle, he said always pick for the moisture. So he had a very practical side of him, and we sort of, you know, Australia being a very tough place to grow food, you've got to sort of work out your priorities pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love that. And you just brought up the whole growing food, and it's a challenge. And I agree that sometimes farmers just need to focus on what they do best, and learning this new stuff or educating can be quite of a challenge. I want to get a bit more of an understanding of like what your farm looks like. Are you growing produce? How big's your land? What kind of keeps you busy on the land?
Yeah, well, just to go back a little bit on my father's story, a lot of people think, you know, 500 and biodynamics is just the preparations. But we've, as taught by Alex, we've got to create the conditions in which for those biology to survive and thrive. And so we use other things like, one of the first things my father did was deep ripping, because obviously he had a hard pan from overgrazing and over-fertilization. So he broke that up first so that the soil can breathe, and we got aerobic microbes, you know, coming into that soil. And then he obviously sprayed the 500. He started doing, Alex was teaching him back in the 60s, rotational grazing. So Dad got the electric fence out for the first time and you know, grazed it off fairly hard, and then moved them quickly, moved the large cattle quickly across the landscape. So the grass had time to recover. And also he did pasture harrowing, where we drag, it used to be chains, but then tyres, we drag them behind the tractor and move the manure, because manure can be wasted by the sun, or it can be overblown with nutrient in its pad form. So what we do is we drag that along the pastures so that the microbes can break it down. Also, we did slashing, so all those grasses that became dormant are revived with the slashing and the mulching. So they're just some of the techniques that's not all of them, of course, and a multi-species seeds into his pasture was another thing that he did. And after about 12 months of doing all those things, he didn't do them all at once, of course, he did in bits and pieces. His water started going back into the soil, and he thought, well, this is a great thing, and this is the solution that I've been looking for. And he's continued ever since. And so I've been working with Dad, just to bring you up to speed now, I've been working with Dad on and off on the farm over the years, and probably worked 25 years in the dairy farm. And then in 1973, when he was 73, he decided he wanted to retire. We'd actually been through the 2000 to 2010 drought, which was horrific. And I started to think that this area that we're in, because there was a lot of water changes, a lot of the water was taken from the land and given to people that owned it. So you ended up with water barons and water investors. And I saw this as a bad thing, and thought that it's no longer how many acres you've got, it's how much water you've got. So I was 48 at the time when he wanted to retire, and I decided to downsize to a vegetable farm, because I just felt that was better use of water resources. And I feel that even in this area, it hasn't really been as wet as when I was a kid. We used to be, there was frogs everywhere, there was swamps everywhere when I was, 10 years old. And now I've got a swamp on my place that hasn't been filled in 8 years. So It's totally different. So I feel I've experienced climate change on a realistic basis. People talk about it, but even my dad and I, and even hearing your grandfather's stories, over 4 generations, you realise, hey, things have changed. So I changed to vegetables for that reason mainly.
Yeah. And what type of vegetables are you partaking in?
Well, I also think that too, some farmers are no longer getting the price they need to make a living. Even with we used to sell our biodynamic milk to the conventional farms, conventional market before certification came around. And then when certification came around, we got a market for it, and then he got a really good price for his milk. But at 48 years old, I was sick of milking cows, basically, and I've always wanted to do veggies because my mother's side is the veggie growing side of the family. And so I took over 50 acres over the back, and in 2009 we got a grant to bore for water, and so I've got my own fresh water on the place, plus I've got an allocation from the channel. And we grow seasonal vegetables for the farmers market. Well, I did for 10 years. And so we grow pretty much everything. I say we, it's I, Ray. I'm the only person that does. My wife helps out occasionally, but it's me.
You need to wear multiple hats, so it is we. It might just be between your ears, but there's lots of we's going on in there, It's got to do this, got to do that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I always say we too. It's like, who's on your team? Like, oh no, like I do have a small team, but when it comes to other projects, just lots of voices in my head telling each other what to do, So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So going to the farmers market in Melbourne, there was a lot of competition in the green space and the potato space and all the cooler climate stuff. And me being in Northern Victoria, I thought, look, I've got a bit of an opportunity to focus on the warmer climate things. So I grew a lot of melons, mini watermelons, rock melons, honeydew, tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, zucchinis, cucumbers, a lot of vine sort of stuff.
Nice. That
they found difficult to grow without a hothouse, at least starting off or finishing off. And yeah, that went really, really well. And then when COVID hit, I was sort of getting a bit tired of that, of all the QR codes, and the fun had gone out of it with all the lines and everything like that. And so I've just recently changed to online service, which is great because I can stay home and see my family, and it's a really good option. So.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have really discovered that there can be other ways of moving produce and farm gates and, CSA models and, I think, and people wanting to buy food directly from the farmer and knowing where it's coming from, how it's grown. Have you seen that interest increase over the pandemic period or of recent times that people want to asking better questions, like how you're farming? Do you use chemicals? Is this organic? Yeah.
Well, I think if I hadn't have been at the farmers market for 10 years and I saw it grow quite dramatically at the end, I don't think I would have been able to go online because there wouldn't have been enough people know about me way up here in Northern Victoria. But we've got this really good delivery system now where we can send it down to Melbourne. There's a depot there and people come, and it's like a click and collect system. And it works really well. So I'm pleased that I did that time at the farmers market just to get my name out there. And people, I used to have depending on the season, I used to call Melon Man, or then I'd go to Sweet Potato Man, and then in the winter I'd be Broccoli Man, depending on what I was growing. So there's some customers would just come and buy watermelons. That's all that they would buy, and then I wouldn't see them for 12 months. And then another one would come and they'd just buy broccoli. And of course, you had all the in-betweens as well. So it's interesting the names you get from the farmers market.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point, and especially for all the soil lovers listening, about how to brand yourself. Sometimes going to the farmers markets, building those relationships, whether it be rain, hail, or shine, it really does kind of compound of being known. So that way, when you do take your enterprise online or you're not at the markets as often, people are drawn to know who you are and kind of follow you around. And I think that's a really important part of marketing, where people think that they can just launch a website or go into a co-op and that's it. But you're still kind of selling a secret at that point. No one really knows who you are. They don't know the story. They haven't built relationships. And often in the marketing world, we say people buy people, not product, so they want to buy from the melon man or the broccoli man or the sweet potato man. Like that's part of the brand, so that's a really important point that you've kind of maybe stumbled across or seen firsthand of why it's important to go to these physical farmers markets.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things that I did at the start was I actually took over from a guy who was selling apricots, biodynamic apricots, and he taught me to sample at the front. So we used to put out heaps of melon samples at the front, and people would come up and get free samples and think, beauty, I got a sample, and they would head on down the road away from the tent about 20 metres, and then they would walk back and they go, that's the best watermelon I've ever had. And to see the look on their face. And so once people get, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do farmers markets and direct sales, is people can't deny the taste on their tongue. That's the best marketing whatsoever. I can talk all I damn well like, but if you put good flavoured product in people's mouths, they will come back time and time again.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is one of the things that we have kind of forgotten the taste, that is a sensor. We see food as a bit of objectified. It's just a thing. But, we're not only losing taste, we're losing the nutritional density and the nutritional value as well. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, why are we spending all this money on food that's almost kind of empty of its flavor and nutrition? And it doesn't take long to reset the palate, and kind of forget. And I think that's part of the kind of big food marketing regime of just like slowly just diffuse the flavor and nutrition, and no one will notice. If we can make it more and bigger and grow faster, that yielding and profits comes above all the rest.
Yeah, and I think too that our taste is a really good indicator of nutrition. Why would our creator or whoever you believe in put that in our mouth if it wasn't an indicator of actual health, And I found too that if you make that flavor good enough, people will pay whatever. They don't care, And I usually get 3 times what I would get at a wholesale market, but people are quite prepared to pay it. And it was a really good marketing thing.
Yeah. And I see that also trending now in the restaurants and people, chefs are really buying top quality food, and people are happy to pay, $30, $40, $50 a plate, but the meal is just an experience that they can't explain any other way.
That's right. But I turned 59 the other day, and I started thinking, and I've been thinking of this for probably 3 or 4 years. It's getting a little bit harder I pick 20 ton of product a year, and I move that 4 times in the van, in the cool room, out of the cool room, off the market. That's 80 ton of produce I lift every year. So it's getting a bit hard. I thought, look, I don't really want to be doing this when I'm 85 years old. And that's when I sort of launched into some of the information products. And I'm not a good writer, Ray. I didn't get great marks at English, but I thought, hey, I can learn anything as long as I get the experience. So the first information product I learned, I got a government grant to do the BioSoil website, and it's basically a heap of stories of they're actually Victorian stories of biodynamic farmers and what they're doing on the land, and that's biosoil.net.au. And so that was my first project into information resources. And then I was going to write a book about my father's story, and I thought, well, my first book ain't going to be my best. So I better get some practice on that. And that's when I decided to write the audiobook, Growing Grain Without Chemicals, which is in a similar vein in that I think that, farmers just like to hear about other farmers' stories. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told they're doing the wrong thing. For me, I just like to hear good stories, and if I'm interested in it, then I want to look into it further. So that's why I sort of came up with the audiobook.
Well, soil lovers, we're going to dig deeper into the audiobook just after this quick break, so stick with us. Hello, soil lovers. I hope you're enjoying today's guest and this podcast, but I wanted to just let you know that when you get excited about soil, just as you're hearing about our guests, then you will want to check out the Soil Learning Centre. The Soil Learning Centre is a hub that we put together and digitalized all the content over the years that were originally on DVD into this online learning experience. So if any of our guests or any of the topics that we speak about during the podcast whet your appetite and you want to get your hands dirtier and dig deeper and get educated around different things around soil, whether it be biodynamics, permaculture, whether it be using a microscope, or whether it just be hanging out with other like-minded educators, mentors, and facilitators, then the Soil Learning Centre is a place for you to hang out and dig deeper. That's the soillearningcentre.com. We have lots of different programs, courses, and even a membership. So if you want to belong to a community of other soil lovers, then that's the place to hang out. Well, until we meet again, enjoy the rest of this podcast. Back to the program. Welcome back, soil lovers. You're hanging out with Mark Rathbone and Regenerative. We're about to talk about Mark's book. Mark, you followed a couple of farmers to get your audiobook content and you follow their journey. Tell us a little bit more about the book then that you then released as an audiobook and why you did it as an audio version.
Well, I actually had help with John Bradshaw. He did a lot of the content writing. And I liked the way, I thought the best way for me to learn to write a book is just to learn from somebody else. And John had been writing a magazine called Biodynamic Growing Magazine. And he did a lot of that. He went to people's places. He spent some time with them. He asked them questions, and then he wrote their story down in this Biodynamic Growing magazine. But unfortunately, magazines have become a little bit old hat, I guess, with everybody consuming YouTube and Spotify, like you and I are doing now, Ray. And and I was sitting. I've got a small 50-acre farm, and around me a big dairy farm and two big chemical. They use chemicals in their production, grain farms. And I thought, what's different between me and them? And the only difference is information. I've been lucky enough, or I've had the opportunity to grow up as BD, and that's all I really know. And if I wanted to go chemical farming, I'd be hopeless at it. So I started thinking to myself, what opportunity or what resources can I provide these people? And I thought, if a person, like I'm a farmer, and I have no time to sit down and read a book. I would have to go on holidays in order to do so. Mm-hmm. So I basically thought, wouldn't it be great to have a resource that a farmer can sit on his tractor and listen to my audiobook and say, well, look, there's these options out there that I could possibly use. And with a couple of repetitions, he might become interested, and then he can look into it further. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted for them to have that option, really.
Yeah. I think that, you hit the nail on the head. Sitting in the tractor is the best way that anyone can consume content. They're multitasking to some degree. They might not actively listen to everything the first time, but it's so easy to go, let me listen to that again, and then it hits home the second or third time they listen to it. And the other thing, like they go, oh, that's that same thing that other person was talking about 4 years ago. Or I went to that ag show and they mentioned this, and now I'm hearing it again, and they just start joining those dots. And you're right, having the book that's sitting on the shelf that never gets read, and even taken on the holiday, 3 pages are read and then taken back on the holiday.
That's right.
It's charged on that many times. The intention's there, but it's just because I'm an audio type of person and video as well, hence the podcast. So.
Yeah, and I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and there might be somebody sitting on the tractor right now listening to this.
Agreed.
And all of your stuff. And you're right, all the little bits of information seed that we drop in those minds collect up in their mind, and then they start to take action. And I feel this is a very important thing, and for us to, influence or help people move to regen ag in a progressive way so that they can do it safely. A lot of our farmers in the early days went cold turkey and straight into it and, ran into a few problems. And I wanted to illustrate that in the book because all of the guys on the audiobook, there's 3 of them, and they have 80 years experience in regen or biodynamic ag. And what better resource to go through to someone that's already made the mistakes? And if we can prevent someone, from making those mistakes a year in and save them a year, then that book is worth, probably $1,000 or more. But, so we've got sort of 3 people on there. They're all from Victoria, actually. And they're all fairly large grain farmers. None of them are small because you have to be fairly big anyway nowadays to make a living out of grain. Mm-hmm. We've got Barry and Fiona Edwards, who are at Murrayville near the South Australian border. And it's like a desert up there, right in the Mallee, compared to where I am in Northern Victoria. And Barry started in the early days, I think it was 85, I can't remember now offhand. And his father had never really sprayed too many chemicals, yet they were having trouble with organic matter and things like that. And he heard about Alex on A Big Country. Alex Podolinsky was on the ABC, and he had a field day in Barham, and he went to the field day, and they started then. And it took Barry, because he was a little bit older and there wasn't as much experience, so it took him about 5 or 6 years before he got his organic matter levels high enough in order for biodynamics to work well. But then the later guys like Terry Phillips and also Steve and Tanya Walter down the southwest, Steve and Tanya at Marnu and Terry's at Kallawatta, they were a little bit further along the line, and they learnt from Barry's experience, and they had a bit more education under their belt. So they were able to move or transition with less problems quicker. So that's the idea of these books, is just to help people along the way.
Yeah, I love that. And so you've mentioned the word regenerative a couple of times during explaining what your book is all about, and it's linked closely to biodynamics. What does the word regenerative mean to you? It's a bit of a buzzword now. Everyone's throwing it around. So what does it mean to you exactly?
Yeah, I don't think it should be too prescriptive. I like to keep it simple in that, for me personally, if I go through a season and everything I've affected is either, been beneficial, if I've been beneficial to everything and I've improved it, then that to me is regenerative. That includes the people that have eaten my food, what tractors I've driven, the soil, the animals around me. If everything has benefited from my being there, I think that's regenerative.
Yeah. And also you number one yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Me too. Yes, of course.
I always say like regenerative journey starts with yourself inside your brain, the farm between your ears, and so, we need to be regenerative humans before we can put the lens of regenerative on as well. So I think you've encapsulated that. And I agree it's to make something better, and I also agree with you that we don't need to have a descriptive, hence why I ask a lot of guests what it means to them personally, because everyone has a little different take on it. And it's that collective knowledge pool that makes it special. I've even had guests on the show that talk about regenerative certification and verification and the pros and cons of that. And there's mixed opinions around that. So, definitely keeping it dynamic. And what you mentioned before about some farmers going cold turkey and going, that's it, we can't till, we can't do this, we're selling the tractor, we're going to go full regenerative. And sometimes it can't happen like that, even with the story that you mentioned with your father, like you needed tractors and machinery to slowly, progressively move the farm into what, each year being better and better, because going cold turkey sometimes can be very detrimental to the success. So we've got to make sure that we don't learn a value and then go, I need to embrace that today. It's fitting it within the journey where it makes sense and being an observer of the land and creating those feedback loops to go, now it's time for me to sell the tiller,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because going cold turkey does not help the planet at all.
No, and the point of the book is just to have a general introduction and show you that there are farmers out there already doing it. They've already experienced it, and you can learn from their experience. But in the Australia biodynamic methodology, or the system that we have in place, we have a mentorship program so that people can come to our farm and see that what we've done, and then they can talk to us and ring us up and say, oh, even if they've got questions in the head, or what about, if the sheep get sick, or what about if, I get an infestation of red-legged earth mite, what do I do in these situations? And Terry Phillips, he went through a red-legged earth mite transition because he stopped pesticides and he used to get headaches from that. And he decided to go BD cold turkey, and he had a red-legged earth mite problem on his crop. And he learned that if he sprayed our preparation 500 and then following that very quickly sprayed our preparation 501, that the sugar content in the crop changed, and the red-legged earth mite actually walked away. They didn't kill them; they weren't interested anymore. So there's little tips in the book about that, about how guys deal with their weeds, how they deal with their animal health, and also just how they build their soil up with cover crops and mulching and things like that. And even Steve and Tanya Walter have a very wide range of grains that they grow, and they go into the manufacturing process and how they market that as well. So we try to cover all facets of, going into regenerative or biodynamics. And I say regenerative with ag with biodynamics is because have you heard the book by Charles Massey, Call of the Red Warbler? He actually dedicates a whole chapter to biodynamics and marks it as having all the aspects of regeneration. So that's why I sort of say the word, because some people unfortunately don't recognise biodynamics as regenerative. So I just wanted to make that clear, I guess.
Yeah. And I think we're getting different iterations as well, whether it be syntropic farming or biodynamic or just permaculture in your own backyard. The ethos of just making something better today than what it was yesterday or this season compared to last season, just having that nurturing improvement mindset rather than destructive and degrading kind of mindset. And sometimes people don't know what they're doing. It's just having that realization, go, oh, this makes sense, as opposed to that. We all don't know what we're doing until we have that realization or that penny drop moment, which I hope is what these podcasts and these type of conversations has to people, where they go, oh, now I get it, where before it just oh, I needed to hear it 7 times before I got it, so very common in the human psychology.
Yeah, one thing Alex Podolinsky always said, that he always invested in the farmer first. The farmer is the most important part of the land, and his knowledge, because in our Australian Demeter biodynamics, we have so many different products, and you're talking about being non-prescriptive. Like, I don't have any cattle on my land, basically because I'm so sick of cattle, I don't really want to see another one after so many years of them. But also, we have to have, when you have the knowledge of how the soil works and what the cows did there, I can actually mimic on my land. And some of these guys in the book now don't have any livestock, because they realise that they can actually increase the organic matter using the preparations, which in the preparations is cow manure, or it's made from cow manure. So there are organisms in there that would come from the cow. So we use our light disking, our slashing, our mulching, our cover cropping to mimic the cow's operation, and we then we don't need the cow as such. So if you had a vineyard and you wanted to regenerate that, you can do that without a cow, providing you have the tools to do so. And biodynamics is a great thing to sort of have those tools, and the understanding on how to use those tools is very important.
Yes, and I just want to stress the point that you made there, that you don't have cows because you don't like dealing with cows. Now, imagine every other part of your farming enterprise being disrupted, because every time you went out, you were being frustrated. It would just ruin the whole farming enterprise. You would do every task with frustration and the wrong intention, and there'd just be like a different feeling on the farm because you had cows. So that's self-awareness to go, I'm going to do this enterprise without what people say needing animal integration, because it makes you happy. And then every other task you do, you're doing it with joy and in great intentions and an uplifting spirit, rather than being annoyed every time you look out the window going, what are those cows up to? Why are they in that paddock now? And there's always angry energy around you, so I think that's good.
Yeah, and like, if you had a vineyard and you didn't want to have cows, or if you had an orchard and you didn't want cows, and sometimes they don't go together because they knock the vines around or the orchard trees around. If you have the knowledge on how to do it without the livestock integration, that's great. I mean, look, I'm not saying that livestock integration is bad. I can see from my father's experience that around the dairy where the cows spend the most time, you can see the benefit of cows, and they do a fantastic job. But what I am saying is that if you don't want to do that, there is the ability to regenerate the soil without it. And it's just a matter of understanding how those cows worked and trying to mimic that on your property.
I love that. Well, we've been talking about soil a lot. Mark, are you ready to become the voice of the soil?
I hope so.
Excellent. Well, Mark, you have now become the soil. You've embodied its energy. It's got a voice. What would you say to all of us on the planet?
That's a tough question you ask, really.
Save it for last.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think the soil would say, look, just hold on a minute. If you let me breathe for a minute, I can do the work for you. Because I feel that, we're pumping it so full of this and that, and, come on, work for me. And in COVID, we had a situation where people just stopped driving their cars, and, you could see mountaintops and things like that, and streams ran clean. And I feel that that's the same for the soil too, that if you just stop putting stuff on it and just let it breathe and let the air in, because Alex always said to us that air is the most important thing for soil, because if it's not, air doesn't get in, we haven't got aerobic microbes, and we've got pest and parasite problems. So that's my message from the soil.
Let me breathe. I love that. There's a lot. I think that, that is almost a breath of fresh air, hearing that, in regards to knowing that the space between the soil is where water can kind of, infiltrate. Yep. It just becomes like a sponge. It's nice to walk on, and that's one of the things I hear all the time with farmers, is that they start walking their land and they're like, oh, this feels different, and it's that first sign of there's something
breathing.
Changing. Yeah, breathing that I can't really work out, but I can feel it, So I love that. Let me breathe is a great takeaway message. Mark, how can people get your audiobook and hang out with you more? Where can they find you online or in the physical world?
Yeah, well, most of my stuff is on saveoursoil.com.au. My socials are connected there. The audiobook's available for $9, I think it is now, and you get just downloads onto your email and you can play it whenever you like. It's only about an hour long, so I don't bore you to death completely. And also I put up there's a little video there about how I run my farm, and also a link to the BioSoil website. So pretty much saveoursoil.com.au is it.
Lovely. What a great domain name. I'm super jealous you have it, but it's a great one. I love the analogy of like SOS and it's time to save our soils. The soils are really throwing out an SOS to get help, and which is the reason why Mark's been doing great work and the reason why I've gotten into this space as well. So those links will be all around the show notes and around the video if you're watching on YouTube or the Soil Learning Center. Mark, any final words, tips of wisdom that you'd like to share with our soil lovers before we wrap it up?
I've got a thing on my website that says if you want to solve health or climate, look to the soil, and even food. Look to the soil, because that's the starter of everything.
Yep. The soil is really the solution.
That's a good one. I never heard that.
You've got
them all, Ray.
I do. I'm a marketing person. I need analogies. That's why I'm Regen Ray. It's the double R. Yeah.
Man, I know where to come to now.
Yeah, Mark, we'll keep hanging out because this has been a great conversation. Soil lovers, I hope you've felt the vibe, and go check out all the work that Mark's doing. I've personally listened to the audiobook twice and really loved it, and a great reminder, and hearing the stories of actual farmers in Victoria, which is where I came from, so it was very close to home. And one thing I've learned is that soil has a global language, so it doesn't matter which part of the world you're learning about soil, the biology is the same. Yes, you might have other climates above it, but let's start listening to the soil and treating it with respect, and learning more about the biology and what we can do to leave our planet better today than what we did yesterday. Mark, thank you so much for hanging out with us and the soil lovers.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Until next time, soil lovers, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into the wonderful world of soil. I'm Regen Ray. I'll hang out with you next time. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.